The Law School Admission Council suspended LSAT testing in mainland China for the January 2026 LSAT and beyond because organized services were taking the LSAT for applicants and stealing unreleased exams in real time. This was not an isolated incident. This was not the result of rumors. And this discovery forced LSAC to act. But it also exposed a much deeper problem that goes far beyond China. And once you understand that problem, the entire admissions system looks different. Now, most people hear the phrase LSAT cheating scandal and they picture a student sneaking notes, somebody whispering answers, maybe somebody using a phone when they shouldn't have been. But that's not what this was. What happened here crossed a line that fundamentally changes how we should look at the problem of LSAT cheating. There is a huge difference between a single individual breaking the rules and the entire system itself being compromised. If it's just one person here or there cheating, the damage is limited. Of course, it's bad, but it's limited in scope. That person might gain a few points here or there. They might unfairly beat out another applicant. And of course, that's wrong, but the system as a whole is still working in that instance. The LSAT is capable of surviving individual cheating because the LSAT is serving tens of thousands of students. It can absorb a little bit of noise here or there. But this situation in China was different. Here, the cheating affected the test itself. Now, these were organized cheating rings that were clever operations because they did three things at the same time. First, they were taking the LSAT by proxy, meaning that in some cases, the registered test taker themselves was not the one taking the LSAT. Somebody else took it for them remotely, not even in the same country in some cases. And from the LSAT's point of view, it was like the right person was taking the test. There were a couple of other cases that made it even worse, though. Second big issue was that unreleased LSAT exams were stolen during the test. In other words, while the test was being taken, the exam content itself was being captured directly. Entire questions, entire sections. And this matters because most LSATs are never released to the public. Those unreleased exams are supposed to remain secret because LSAC reuses them for future LSAT administrations. So the damage is carrying forward for future LSAT administrations. And those exams that were stolen were collected and then resold to future LSAT test takers. In other words, creating private libraries of real LSAT exams that honest students never got to see. So that made the advantage in cheating not just temporary to that LSAT test date, but permanent for months and even years to come. So this is not just one or two people getting away with it. We're talking about future LSAT test takers who unknowingly compete against those who've already seen future material in advance. Now, this is a serious emergency because while cheating attempts are expected, unreleased material being circulated privately is the worst case scenario for any standardized test because you then cannot assume that future exams are secure. You can't fix that problem quietly either. And that's why LSAC discontinued LSAT testing in mainland China for the foreseeable future, starting with this month's January 2026 LSAT administration. And this also affects law schools as well, because when admissions officers hear that unreleased LSAT content has been leaked, they're thinking to themselves, how confident can we be that those scores are legit? This gives them more skepticism. It puts the LSAT under greater scrutiny, and it puts more pressure on high scorers to prove themselves, which means honest students carry part of the cost, not because they were doing anything wrong, but because trust in the entire system has been weakened. And once those unreleased exams are stolen and distributed, the LSAT is a test being systematically mined to benefit future LSAT cheaters. And so this has triggered a serious structural response. And the fundamental issue, in my opinion, is that remote testing is not viable for the future of the LSAT. It is harder to secure than in-person testing. And the technology itself is not necessarily bad, but because it's an arms race. When you're taking the LSAT in person, you've got everybody in the same room, everybody's using approved equipment, proctors can see the entire testing space, and phones, notes, electronic devices are all being controlled. Of course, cheating is always technically possible, but it's a lot more limited, a lot less likely, a lot riskier for the cheaters. But when the LSAT is fully remote, everybody's in a different room. Every room has different furniture, different lighting, different layout. Every computer is different. Every internet connection is different. And Prometric, the testing company, no longer has control over the environment. And when it's in a private space, there's a lot more risk. The attack surface is different in nature. It grows dramatically because instead of having to secure a couple of testing centers, you're now trying to secure thousands of homes, thousands of computers, thousands of networks, thousands of different physical rooms. Each one is unique, which makes enforcement harder and makes cheating easier. And I know that remote proctoring sounds great, but the reality is remote proctoring only shows what the system is able to see. It can't see what's happening off camera. It can't see what's happening on another device. It can't see what's happening inside the operating system of the laptop being used, and it can't see any software running invisibly in the background. The proctor just sees the video feed and the screen. That's it. And if the cheating's happening outside of those boundaries, the system is not going to be able to detect it. And remote tests usually rely heavily on identity checks, which means showing an ID, taking a photo of facial matching, periodic camera checks, and those steps all prevent casual impersonation, but they don't prevent professional impersonation from a serious cheating operation. And if a cheating company can understand the system and prepare for it, they can replay camera feeds, they can mimic normal facial movement, and imitate natural typing and mouse behavior. And at that point, it's verifying a simulation of a test taker, not the test taker itself. And modern cheating is designed to look legit. It's not going to look like cheating. It looks like normal behavior. Typing speed is regular, mouse movements regular, and everything matches what the Prometric company is expecting to see. Security systems can only look for patterns. And when attackers can copy and simulate those patterns, the alarms aren't going to get triggered. And live proctors can't catch everything. They can look for obvious red flags like somebody leaving the room, someone else sitting in that same chair, matching the photo ID or not, someone using a phone during the test, any loud noises, but they cannot inspect the internal processes of a computer or detect hidden software or verify who is actually controlling the keyboard. And it's not a one-to-one ratio. There are far more test takers than there are proctors. And so they're watching many people at the same time, often with delays. And so it makes subtle cheating very hard to detect in real time. And most remote test security happens after the exam ends, like reviewing recordings, analyzing answer patterns, flagging unusual timing or score jumps, all of which creates a delay. And it's possible for a test taker to complete the exam successfully before anybody even realizes something was wrong. And at that point, the score might have already been released, and admissions might have already made a decision on that applicant. And investigations take a lot of time. And the unfortunate fact is that attackers only need to find one weakness in the system, whereas defenders, like Prometric and LSAC, have to protect everything. And cheating services like those being used in mainland China can test their tools repeatedly on different exams and adjust quickly. They can learn from every failure. But testing companies and LSAC are a lot more bureaucratic. They move a lot more slowly. And so that creates an imbalance. And remote testing, of course, was introduced during the pandemic. It solved real problems at the time because, of course, in-person testing was closed, travel was impossible, students need to take their exam right away, and that was the best available option to do it remotely. But that doesn't have to be the permanent solution. At this point, a temporary solution is not working in 2026 and beyond. And so remote testing has created an opportunity and a vulnerability that should be discontinued given that cheating is rising and in-person is a viable option. So my recommendation is strongly encouraging both LSAC, Prometric, law schools all to push for a return to exclusively in-person testing. This may not happen overnight. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but it is the best possible option to preserve the integrity of the LSAT. Now, I see a lot of questions coming into the chat here. I will get to as many of those as I can. Please drop your questions in the chat now or later. I see a bunch coming in. And by the way, folks, if you find these live streams helpful, I offer these every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, on YouTube, TikTok, wherever else you're watching this. And if you'd like my help, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to meet with anyone watching this now or later. Now let's see questions coming in here. Pablo's asking, how do I feel about thousands of people getting accommodations? Well, if we compare it to the previous situation, LSAC was far too strict, and they were denying accommodations to those who deserved them. They got sued several times under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and as a result, they got far more liberal in granting accommodations, and I think that honestly, many people are getting them who probably shouldn't be. I personally hear from students every single week, if not every single day, telling me they got time and a half or double time, and it's more time than they need, but they're not going to complain about it, so they're going to take it. And so I think to maintain the viability and reliability of the LSAT, I think that LSAC should probably do a bit more than they are doing to limit accommodations to only those who deserve them truly. And where do you draw that line? Of course, it's easier said than done, but I think there are a lot of people getting accommodations who shouldn't be, and that's leading to some of the LSAT score inflation that we're seeing. Got a question from Zoe asking, do you have any advice about applying for the upcoming cycle, given that loans aren't as accessible? Yes, so starting with next fall, the Grad Plus loans are being eliminated. There are going to be some student loan limits, and so it's going to make it harder to pay for law school, harder to pay for higher education in general. And so my recommendation is to get merit aid, in other words, get scholarships from law schools. And the way to do that is by getting a higher LSAT score than is required. And so law schools give you scholarship money based on the strength of your application, in particular, the strength of the numbers that you're applying with. And so if you are applying with an LSAT score, a GPA, or both that are above the medians of that school, they are likely to give you scholarship money to attract you to attend their school in particular, because by doing so, you will raise their standing in the ever important US News Law School rankings. So if you are in a situation where it's going to be hard to pay for law school, I would say choose a lower ranked school where you can get more scholarship money over going to a higher ranked school with less scholarship money. Getting a better LSAT score will enable you to get more scholarships. It's the easiest money you'll ever make. It's why folks invest in LSAT programs like mine, because they want to raise their LSAT score. They want to strengthen their application in order to get more scholarship money. And so if you could spend a couple of months studying for the LSAT, invest a bit in your LSAT preparation through a course or through coaching, and that could get you a full ride to law school, that could save you literally tens of thousands of dollars in scholarship money, maybe even get you a full ride, meaning you're paying zero for law school. Well worth the investment. And again, if you want my help, the link in my bio, link in the description below the video, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me personally, whether you're taking the LSAT in February, April, June, or beyond. I'll be happy to help you out. Got a question from KJ asking, what if you only have 4 months to study? Is that enough? It very well could be enough. Depends on your goals, depends on where you're currently starting from. We like to personalize every program for the individual student. But let's say you're reaching out now, you want to take the LSAT in June. There's no LSAT in May this year, so you actually have 5 months if you're aiming for June. Gives you plenty of time to improve, could be enough, but let's say if you want to go from 120 to 180, maybe you want to allow a bit more time than 5 months. If you want to go from 160 to 170, then 5 months is way more time than you need. You want to look for what is your current score, what's your goal score, and what's the time frame that you have available to you. In other words, how much time can you put in per day, per week, per month to reach your goal? Then we work backwards from that to craft a plan of attack. So you want to build a strong foundation first, understanding the different sections, the different question types. You want to gain proficiency in the basics of the exam. Then you want to work on pacing and time management, doing individual sections. And finally, pulled all together with full-length timed exams to build up your endurance. If you've only got 1 month, of course, it's a bit tight. But if you've got 6 months, you can devote 2 months to foundation, 2 months to pacing, 2 months to endurance. Of course, that would be your primary focus for each part of that. Of course, you can adjust accordingly. Again, if you want to talk through your situation, feel free to book a call with me. Scanning through other questions here. Black Queens Forever is asking, so is the LSAT still required? I heard the LSAT won't be required anymore. So the LSAT is still required by the vast majority of law schools. Some law schools are allowing alternative exams, like the GRE, for example, but according to the recently released ABA 509 reports, the ABA is the American Bar Association. They published detailed stats on every single ABA-approved law school, and what they're showing is that despite law school student numbers increasing last cycle, the number of students getting in with GRE scores actually dropped during that same period, and when it should have risen to stay proportionate with the number of law school students entering. What that tells us is that law schools are not so big on the GRE. They're not loving it. They're not finding it as useful. And so I would recommend not applying with the GRE if you can avoid it. The LSAT is still the main game in town, and applying with an LSAT score shows them that you are serious about law school, in particular, that you're not applying to law school on a whim or for lack of a better option. In other words, you're taking this process seriously. And by the way, the LSAT score is correlated with first-year law school grades, correlated with bar passage rates as well, and law schools want to admit students who are likely to do well in law school and also pass the bar. The GRE is not demonstrated with the same degree of seriousness to be correlated well with first-year law school grades or bar passage rates. And so if you want to improve your odds of getting in, if you want to improve the scholarship money you can get, the LSAT score is the best way to do it. And again, if you want my help, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Nanat's asking, is it true that the LSAT has become more difficult? It's a matter of opinion, right? So the LSAC removed the logic games section after the June 2024 LSAT. They replaced it with a second score logical reasoning section. That was the result of a lawsuit by blind test takers contending that they were at an unfair disadvantage on the LSAT because they couldn't benefit from diagramming the way that other test takers could. LSAC ultimately settled the lawsuit and agreed to develop a new version of the LSAT without the logic games section, and they chose ultimately just to replace it with more logical reasoning. And so when they added more logical reasoning and they removed logic games, they also incorporated more logic games style reasoning into the logical reasoning section. More formal logic, more quantitative reasoning, more conditional reasoning. And so did that make it harder? Maybe. But you could also argue that it made it easier because with fewer sections, no more logic games, there is now less material to study. You can narrow your focus to only logical reasoning and reading comp, and any gains you make in your understanding of logical reasoning will be doubled across the two sections. So my recommendation is devote roughly 2/3 of your time to logical reasoning in particular, since it is 2/3 of the test. Any gains you make in your understanding of logical reasoning are doubled across those two sections. And of course, ever since LSAC made the change, we've removed all logic games from our courses and coaching and devoted more effort and attention to logical reasoning in particular. Aiden's asking, do I think a 160 is high enough to get substantial scholarships? Depends on the school that you're targeting, right? So if you're targeting a law school with an LSAT median of 145 or 150, a 160 LSAT score could get you significant scholarships, maybe even a full ride. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend going to a law school where their medians of 145 or 150 because their employment outcomes and bar passage rates are not likely to be very good. So I'd say, why not go for a 170 or a 175, get into a better law school where their LSAT medians of 160 or 165, then you can still get substantial scholarships and also get better outcomes upon graduating. In other words, a law school where you're going to get significant scholarships with a 160 probably isn't a law school worth going to. That's my personal opinion, of course. It's really a matter of your opinion, of course. You have your own unique situation. Maybe it is worth it for you, but all else being equal, I'd say push for a higher score. And Aiden, when are you taking the LSAT, by the way? Do you have time to improve more? Are you taking it in February with only a month to go, or do you have more time for April or June? If you could study for the LSAT full time for the next month or so and hit it hard, then you might have enough time. But I see you're going for April and June. That's great. So you got 3 months till April, 5 months till June. That's enough time to make really anything at all happen and improve significantly. So I'd say, yeah, push hard for the 170 plus. No reason to shoot for anything less in my book. Mason's asking, is a top 20 law school like UGA still valuable? I mean, going to a top-ranked law school is always a valuable move. Prestige always has something important to be said for it. Reputation matters, especially if you want to go into big law, if you want to maximize your employment outcomes, if you want to get a clerkship, for example. You want to go to a prestigious law school, sure, but you've got to balance that consideration with getting significant scholarship money. And so depending on your goals, you might want to push for a prestigious school. If you're looking to maximize for or minimize your debt and maximize for financial outcomes in the short term, maybe you want to go for a lower ranked school where you can get more scholarship money. So it's always considerations to weigh and measure. But top law schools are always a valuable move if you can afford them and if you're willing to take out and able to take out those loans. Pow's asking about experience with tutoring those who have ADHD or ADD. Yes, we have a lot of experience working with students who have ADHD, ADD, other learning differences or challenges. And we also have a lot of experience working with students who have accommodations for extra time or extra breaks. A lot of students have time and a half, have double time, have unlimited stop-start breaks. And so if you want to talk through a personal plan for your situation, you can, of course, book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. And I'll be happy to talk you through your situation, help you craft a plan of attack for whenever you're taking the LSAT. Just scanning through here for more questions coming in. Josephine's asking, do you think being a college athlete will hinder my ability to get into a top law school? I don't see why it would. I mean, being a college athlete is awesome. Shows discipline, persistence, perseverance, balancing multiple challenging obligations at the same time. It may have impacted your GPA negatively a little bit, but if you can write compelling essays about your experience as an athlete, balancing multiple responsibilities simultaneously, that could certainly be a benefit for you. But law schools would certainly not look down on your having been a college athlete. They're going to respect your ability to handle multiple difficult things simultaneously. Poe's asking, why do top law schools not give scholarships? I'll pause there. They actually do give scholarships. So I think there might be a bit of confusion there or a misunderstanding. Harvard and Yale law schools in particular don't give out merit aid. They only give out need-based aid, probably because they can already source plenty of qualified applicants based on just their reputations alone, so they don't need to give out merit aid. But other law schools, including top law schools, including, for example, Columbia, for example, Chicago, NYU, Northwestern, Cornell, they all do give out merit-based aid in addition to need-based aid. And of course, they have plenty of affluent applicants, as you're mentioning, but they do still give out both merit aid and need-based aid as well. Got a question about part-time evening students. Do you really need a high LSAT for those programs as well? So you don't need as high an LSAT score for part-time programs. It's a bit easier to get in as a part-time student to a given school than to get in as a full-time student, but you do still want to have the best possible numbers, especially if you're looking for merit scholarships, if you want to avoid taking out loans, especially given those new student loan limits, which are going to make it harder to pay for law school. So I recommend, of course, always going for the best possible numbers. Cash is asking, do you think there is a ceiling for achieving the 170s? 95% of people don't achieve that score. Why not? Well, first of all, the LSAT is quote unquote curved. It's a standardized exam, meaning that by definition, most people will not achieve a top score. In other words, the LSAT is standardized such that not everybody can get a 180. If they did, it would be meaningless, and law schools would not be able to distinguish between different applicants based on their scores. And so they're designed to spread students along an entire spectrum from 120 to 180, meaning that some people are going to get 120s, some will get 150s, some will get 180s, some will get everything in between. Now, as people study more and get more questions right, LSAC responds by increasing the difficulty of the questions on the LSAT, and they also have to change the percentiles. And so it used to be, for example, that you could get a 173 on the LSAT and be in the 99th percentile. Now you've got to get a 175 in order to be in the 99th percentile. So getting a 175 isn't what it used to be. I got a 175 approximately 20 years ago. That put me in the top 1%, if not point something percent. Now it would only put me in the top 1%. In other words, I would have to get a higher LSAT score and get more questions right to get a given LSAT score today than I would back then, because there's more competition, there's more LSAT score inflation due to people studying more and due to more people getting accommodations for extra time. Back when I took it 20 years ago, LSAC was denying accommodations to most people. Now they're giving them out to most people who ask for them. So a lot of changes over time, but again, the LSAT is meant to be standardized, and it's designed so that not everybody will get a top score. If too many people get more questions right, LSAC responds by making the questions harder, and we have seen that over time. The LSAT is in fact getting harder, more difficult questions on it. And so if you're say you're a paralegal talking to your attorneys at your firm, talking to older relatives who didn't study that much for the LSAT, they would have to study a lot more today to get the score they earned than they would have back then, because there's more competition now. Aiden's asking how much our programs are, and so we actually customize every program for the individual student. So it's not a one-size-fits-all with our programs. We consult with you personally. We look at your time frame, your goals, where you're currently at, and then we craft a personalized coaching program for you to help you achieve your goal of a given score increase in a given time period. It's not a standardized menu of options. It's personalized and custom to your situation, tailor-made for you, given the time that you can put in. So if you want to talk through your personal situation and you want me to help you craft a plan of attack to help you reach your goals on the LSAT, whether you're taking it in February, April, June, or beyond, you can book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. I'll be happy to help you out. Kylie is saying, I'm struggling with reading comp because I feel like I'm taking too much time rereading. That's a really common issue, Kylie. I'm glad you raised it. So the question is, of course, to start with, what is your current approach, right? Are you spending too much time reading the passage, which means you're not having enough time to answer the questions in particular? Oftentimes, you've got to focus on only the higher yield areas, like the main point, the primary purpose, the passage organization. You want to start there, and then, and only then, go into the details, the supporting examples, to help you solve specific questions later. A lot of students get bogged down taking notes, highlighting, underlining, and then the funny thing is that a lot of what they end up writing down ends up not even being that useful to help them solve the questions. So my big recommendations for most students starting off are take fewer notes, focus only on the big picture, main idea type information, the author's opinion, the major viewpoints, and then and only then go back to the details, the supporting examples for specific questions when you need to solve them later down the line. So I hope that's helpful. Feel free to ask about any follow-ups or again, book the call with me and we could talk through your approach to reading comp more. MA is asking, how would you recommend studying or mastering flaw questions? I've been up all night with this. Okay, so to solve flaw questions, my first thought for you is going to be familiarize yourself with the biggest LSAT flaws, the classic logical fallacies like confusing necessary and sufficient conditions, confusing correlation and causation, ad hominem personal attacks, for example. If you can ID those classic logical fallacies, you will then be able to more easily recognize them when they come up in context. So first, again, learn the classic logical fallacies. Then also recognize that every single argument on the LSAT contains a gap of some kind. And the question stem that tells you it's a flaw is telling you that we should not extend the principle of generosity to the arguer, but rather we should assume they have failed to consider something crucial. Then prephrase or predict in your own words how you would articulate the major problem with the argument, meaning what is the flaw, and then you'll be more easily able to identify it when you see it in the choices. In other words, your articulation will be more clear and easier to understand than LSAC's abstract wording of the flaw. But if you can hold your own idea in your own head, it'll be easier to spot it in the choices when you come across it. So I hope that's helpful. Again, feel free to book a call with me to discuss it further. Sandy's asking, what should I do? My reputation was affected by defamation, but I want to go to law school. So if you've been a victim of defamation and you still want to go to law school, going to law school would not be a barrier to your going. I mean, I guess my question is this like someone's going to Google your name and come across all sorts of untrue things and you're concerned about that? You could, of course, try to consult a lawyer to get those things taken down if they're untrue, of course. But law schools, first of all, they're not always going to Google you in the first place. And secondly, if you haven't been arrested or convicted of anything, I don't see why this would necessarily be an issue. Of course, the details matter. If they do happen to Google you and they come across something that looks pretty bad, you might want to explain that. Maybe this is potential material for an application essay, but I do think the details matter here. But just with the limited context I have here, I mean, I don't see why defamation alone would prevent you from going to law school or pose any sort of issue. Law schools usually care a lot more about arrests and convictions or academic dishonesty on your transcript, like for plagiarism, for example. But this alone wouldn't necessarily be an issue. So I hope that helps. Just scanning through for other questions here. Fine Forever saying, the school I'm applying to has a 91% bar passage rate. Median LSAT is 150 to 156. Okay, so the bar passage rate really is not too bad. 91% is pretty high, all else being equal. The LSAT median's not super high, though, of 150 to 156. And so if you could get a 160, 165, 170, you could get significant scholarship money from a school like that, and you'd be able to go to a law school with a great bar passage rate. So that could be a pretty good outcome. The other thing I want to look at, though, are the employment outcomes for that school. Bar passage rate's important, but employment outcomes are also important as well. You want to go to law schools that have a high percentage of their graduates in jobs that require a JD. In other words, you don't want to go to a law school where people take the bar exam, they pass the bar, but then they're working as baristas. Presumably, you're going to law school to get a job that requires you to have a JD in the first place that will increase your earning potential upon graduating. So just look carefully at the employment outcomes as well. Mason's asking, do I need to go to law school in the state I want to practice in? No, you definitely do not. You can go to law school in one state and practice in another state, but law schools will typically prepare you specifically to pass the bar exam in the state where they are located. So, for example, New York State has its own bar exam, California has its own bar exam, and then many other states are part of the uniform bar exam. So in other words, there are not 50 different bar exams for 50 different states. Bigger states tend to have their own bar exam, but other states will be part of the uniform bar exam, so you can more easily take the bar in one state and practice in another, of course. But it might not be a bad idea if you're looking to practice in New York or California to go to law school in that state. Otherwise, you've got to learn some additional information after law school for that particular state's bar. And of course, you can always talk to admissions about this and see what they have to say. User 5267 is asking, what is the best way to stay consistent in LSAT performance? So I would recommend crafting a personal study plan that lays out for you exactly what to do every single day from now until your test. So lay out when to take full exams, when to drill LSAT questions by type, when to do timed sections, and when to review fundamentals. So for example, for students in our LSAT coaching programs, we lay out for you exactly what to do from your start date through your LSAT test date, building a strong foundation first, then working on pacing and time management, doing individual sections, and finally, pulling it all together with full-length timed exams. And then we have you meeting with a coach at least once every single week, if not twice or 3 times a week, depending on your time frame, for regular check-ins, to answer your questions, to explain problems to you, to look at how you're approaching things. And so if you're taking the LSAT in only 1 month, we craft for you a more intensive LSAT bootcamp style program with more frequent coaching. If your LSAT test date is 5 months away or 7 months away, we spread it out a bit more, where you're meeting with a coach maybe just once a week, because we don't want you to burn out. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. But consistency is key, and having a study plan is part of what gives you the accountability, the motivation, and the support to keep you moving forward. Because the thing is that when you're LSAT, especially when it's far off, like 6 months or beyond, it's easy to always back burner it in favor of more pressing, more urgent priorities, and then it later ends up being never. And so one of the benefits of a coaching program like ours is that we give you the accountability with the regular live meetings with your coach, with the instructors, with the other students in study groups, for example, so that you always have something on the calendar this week to make it a priority, blocking it off on your calendar. And we're going to be asking you, are you showing up? Hey, where were you? We missed you last week. We want to make sure that you're going to keep putting in the time, because there is a lot of material to cover. There are roughly 60 released LSAT exams. They're numbered 101 to 159 on LSAC's Law Hub platform. You also have several thousand other questions in drill sets and individual sections, and you don't have to work through all of it, of course, but we want to make sure that you are covering the most recent exams in the lead up to your test date. And so if your LSAT is only 1 month away, for those of you taking the LSAT in February, we're going to have you focus on the most recent 10, 15 exams. If your LSAT is 3 months away, we'll have you focus on the most recent 30 exams. If your LSAT is 6 months away, we'll have you focus on the most recent 50 exams or so. And the LSAT is now online. It's not on paper anymore, with rare exceptions. And so I always recommend studying like you're going to take it digitally online using LSAC's Law Hub platform. You can get 4 exams for free on Law Hub with a free lsac.org account. You can get the rest of them with the Law Hub Advantage subscription. It's about $120 a year, well worth the investment. The problem is, though, the questions do not come with explanations for most of them. And so if you want explanations and you want live support, you got to go outside of LSAC. And of course, we have coaching programs to help you out. I see Brittany popping in that she used our resources. Fantastic, Brittany. Congrats on graduating this upcoming May. Glad you found the program helpful. And so, folks, if you want to talk through your LSAT study plan for whenever you're taking it, you can, of course, book that free LSAT tutoring lesson with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. I'll be happy to help you out and help you craft a plan of attack. Julian is asking, what is the best way to study if I don't have thousands for materials? And so, of course, you don't need thousands for materials. It's possible to self-study. The first thing I would get is the Law Hub Advantage with all the released LSAT practice questions. For additional free support, I have the LSAT Unplugged YouTube channel with literally thousands of videos on every section, every question type, going back several years now. I'm also doing these free live streams every single weekday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, on YouTube and on TikTok. Happy to answer your questions on anything at all. LSAT and law school admissions. If you find these helpful, by the way, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. I don't do any advertising for these. And the algorithm doesn't really boost these lives because they can't run ads during them. And so I really do appreciate your support spreading the word. I'm glad you're finding these helpful, guys. Got a question from Flacco asking, what differentiates us from other programs? And so I can't really speak to other programs since I haven't used the others in particular, but we do have a lot of students coming to us after having tried other programs. From what I hear, a lot of other programs focus more on drilling LSAT questions by type. A lot of them focus on watching videos. And of course, we have videos, but we focus a lot more on live support because what really makes the difference, especially when you're looking for a top score, is getting direct, personalized feedback. Because the thing is that when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. And so getting some expert guidance from someone who's been there already, gotten that top score themselves, and been through the process, it's going to make your path forward that much smoother. And so is it possible to get a top score self-studying? Of course it is. But if you want to get there faster, if you want to get there more easily, if you want to be done with the LSAT once and for all on a shorter time frame, in my experience, the best way to get there is through getting some personal attention. And we personalize every program for the individual student. It's not a one-size-fits-all. The best way to join is actually through getting a personal call with me for free so we can talk through your situation and help you craft a personal plan of attack, given your time frame, your goal score, and where you're at right now. So if you want to talk through that, of course, you can always book a free call with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. Again, link below the video, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to help you out. Man of Few Words is asking, do you think I'm screwed if I take the LSAT in April and still apply for law school? So in other words, is the April LSAT too late for this cycle? I think is what this person's asking. And so the April LSAT, it's probably too late for most schools. Some schools will take the result of the April LSAT, but most do not, unfortunately. But you can contact individual schools to ask. The January LSAT definitely is not too late for this cycle. The February LSAT also is not too late. But once you get past February, you are past some law schools' deadlines, and there is also less scholarship money available. And so if you can't be done with the LSAT by February, I would recommend, of course, going for April or June, but instead applying at the very beginning of the cycle in the fall. Instead, so that you're applying earlier in the cycle when it's easier to get in and there's more scholarship money available as well. I see that Anissa and Demonic are both asking if I offer in-person LSAT prep. Unfortunately, I don't offer in-person anymore. I used to, of course. I'm from New York myself, and so we offered in-person classes in downtown Brooklyn as well as Manhattan back in the day. But after the pandemic, we moved everything entirely online, and we haven't really looked back because online is just easier for most folks. It's more convenient, no commute time. We get access to the best coaches regardless of location. Everything is more easily recorded and uploaded to the platform so that you can watch it and rewatch it later. And so I don't think we're going to go back to in-person anytime soon. We only do online via Zoom and through video chat And that way you can choose the best coaches anywhere in the world through our program. And so again, if you want to talk through the situation, your personal goals and time frame, of course, you could book the call with me. Again, the link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube. Again, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok as well. David's asking, do you need to be a good reader to get a good LSAT score? I would argue yes. I mean, the LSAT is really entirely a test of reading comprehension. In other words, what are the words on the screen saying? What do they mean? The wrong answers are typically describing something that is not in the passage, not in the text, not supported by it, not answering the question. And so the wrong answers are usually a distortion of what you are actually looking for. In other words, the devil is in the details, and it comes down to reading carefully. When I go over questions with students, I'll often just ask them, what does the passage say? What does the argument say? What does the choice say? And when the student looks back at the text on a second or third look, they often find what they misread. In other words, the LSAT is playing on common misconceptions or assumptions that you are likely to make. And so the LSAT is ultimately a test of pattern recognition, the patterns of reasoning in the arguments, the patterns in structures of reading comprehension passages, and the patterns in the mistakes you are most prone to making. And so at LSAT Unplugged, we teach a framework called the Socratic Review Method. This is a cornerstone of my courses, my coaching programs. The idea being, we want to drill down to exactly where your misunderstanding stemmed from. Was it in the passage, the question, or the choices? Was it a tempting wrong answer? Was it an unappealing right answer? And the reason we do it this way is because if we can drill down to the root cause of what you're getting wrong and why, we can help you avoid making the same mistake again. We recommend keeping a mistake log, an error journal, whatever you want to call it, where you track the questions you're getting wrong and why. We look at the stimulus, meaning the passage, the question, and the choices, and we have columns for each one of those, because if we can identify a pattern in the mistakes of your process in approaching the questions, we can help you avoid making the same mistakes again. And a lot of the coaching ends up just giving you accountability to follow that process, to point out, hey, we noticed that you're making the same kind of mistakes on this question type over and over again. Let's stop doing it that way and do it this other way instead, or at least try out this other way and see if it works better. And through experimentation, through repetition, through exposure, you improve little by little over time. And each exam, you're doing better and better and better. You take at least 10 to 15 full-length timed exams before the big day, so that test day itself is like just another run-through. Now, I see Will is asking, how many months should I study for the LSAT? Well, a lot of folks will try to knock it out in just a month or two, but I recommend at least allowing 2 to 3 months, if not 4, to achieve your fullest potential. Can you do it in less than 4 months? Of course you can, but if you want to get a top score, it usually takes a bit more time because, again, the LSAT is testing patterns. It is a skills-based test, not a test of memorization, meaning you can't really cram for this. It's not like you're doing flashcards. It's more about getting exposure to the methods of reasoning on the test and the typical mistakes in your process. And so if you wanted to do it in a month, we do have more intensive boot camp style programs. But if you really want to hit a top score and take it and get the 170s, I would say probably go for a later test date at least 3 months away to maximize the score that you can achieve. So speaking now, early January, you could try for February, but I'd recommend instead going for April or June just to give yourself more time. Yeah, so April's a good move. Gives you a solid 3 months. Even starting from scratch, that could be enough time. But again, of course, feel free to book the call with me, the free tutoring lesson, unpluggedprep.com/start, and we'll talk through your situation together. Got a question from Asian Invasion asking, hey Teach, I realized questions peak in complexity and annoying wordplay around questions 7 to 11 and 20 to 25. How can I train for this? So yes, you're right that the first questions earliest in the section are typically easier, and they get harder as the section goes on. The hardest ones are later in the section in the early 20s, like you said. And I would recommend drilling harder questions. So you do a couple of sections where you only do the latter or second half of the section where you're doing only hard questions, because the easier ones, you're probably getting those right anyway. The harder ones where you need to get more exposure and get more time on those. And so I would suggest, if you want to get harder questions right and you're getting the easy ones right already, just do more hard questions and look at what is making those harder for you. Easier questions have fewer tricks in them. Harder questions have more tricks. And so when we look at what is LSAC doing to increase the difficulty level of a question, they are adding in more traps. For example, they are not including key indicator words for necessary and sufficient conditions. They are not including key indicator words for evidence and conclusion. They are burying the conclusion in the middle of the passage or argument. They are using annoying words like unless, except, until, or without. They're using more abstract wording. They're making them on tougher, more unfamiliar topics. And so you look at what's making a question harder for you, and then you're learning how can you navigate the question in spite of those tricks and traps. That's where the review process comes into play. So some thoughts on it, of course, and if you want to book a call with me, we could talk through it more together. Manhattan's asking, how can I get a scholarship for law school if I'm an international student with an LSAT score of 169? So being an international student really has no bearing on the merit scholarship money that you can get from law schools. The question for me is, how can we make you a more attractive candidate? And it's going to be by increasing your LSAT score. So your GPA is probably pretty fixed at this point. And if you earned your GPA outside of North America, they're not really going to factor it in because they don't know how to evaluate GPAs from overseas. And so they're going to focus even more on your LSAT score than they would otherwise. And if you are a non-native English speaker, they're going to give more attention to your English proficiency and fluency to make sure that you are, in fact, proficient in written and spoken English. So you want to have killer application essays, but you also want to raise that LSAT score, because scholarship money, merit aid, is primarily a function of your LSAT and your GPA. And assuming that your GPA is a non-factor, it all rides on the LSAT. So you want to get above 170 to maximize your scholarship money, especially if you want to go to top law schools. I mean, the top 14 law schools all have LSAT medians of 170 to 174 or so. And so you want to ideally be above a 174 to maximize the scholarships that you can get. And the January LSAT's not too late for this cycle. Neither is the February LSAT. And so you might want to go for one of those if you're already signed up for it. Otherwise, maybe you take April, maybe you delay a cycle. But it could be, and I know that nobody ever wants to do that, of course, but it could be well worth it if it gets you more scholarship money, maybe even a full ride. Could be the easiest money you'll ever make. Just scanning through here for other questions coming in. Alex is asking about going to a 3+3 law program, meaning a combined undergrad and law school, or an accelerated JD program, versus going to a T14. So I don't love combined 3+3 programs because you lose all scholarship negotiation leverage. You are essentially committing to going to the same law school for undergrad and JD without having multiple options to negotiate scholarships. So if you literally do not care about scholarship money, by all means, go for the 3+3, lock in your JD admission early. But if you want scholarships, if you want merit aid, I would recommend not going for the 3+3, applying regular, applying to maybe 10, 15, 20 schools, getting more offers, and then you can negotiate between the schools, play them off each other, say to school A, hey, I'd love to choose you, but school B is offering me more money. Are you able to match that? Because although I would prefer your school, finances are real, and so I've got to consider that as well. And you can usually get them up a bit, and if you negotiate more, you can get them up more. Do it politely, of course, but there's nothing wrong with it. Students are too often afraid that it's going to look rude, but I mean, listen, you are a future lawyer. Negotiating is part of the profession, and I'm not saying to use ChatGPT for your application essays, but it can be helpful for doing that back and forth negotiation. Just tell it what your goal is and then work backwards from that. But the best way to be in the best possible negotiating position is to come in with a more attractive applicant profile, meaning high LSAT, high GPA. If you're still early in undergrad, focus on the high GPA if you're a freshman or a sophomore. But if you're a junior or a senior, it's a good idea to kind of switch primary focus to the LSAT, because it's kind of funny, but your LSAT score is one day of a couple of hours, and it's going to weigh more heavily in your chances of getting in and scholarship negotiations than all of undergrad combined. Meaning that your LSAT weighs more heavily than all 3-4 years of college, or 5 years, depending on how long it takes. And so you want to give it the attention it deserves. Hope that helps. Feel free to ask any follow-ups. I see TTG's asking, I got a 130 with no prior knowledge. What do you recommend to increase my score in logical reasoning? So I never recommend putting much attention or focus on a cold diagnostic, because it tells you what you already know. You have not yet learned the language of the LSAT, but of course you can with time, with exposure, with actual studying. And so use it as a benchmark to measure your later future progress. As for what should you do to increase logical reasoning, study. You haven't studied yet. You have no prior knowledge, like you said. And so do the work, build the foundation, get a program, get a book at least, learn the different sections, learn the different question types, get exposure to what the LSAT's actually testing you on. There are roughly 15 different types of logical reasoning questions. You got strengthen, weaken, flaw, parallel, resolve, necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, and so on. Then there's reading comp to work on. You've also got pacing and time management, doing individual sections, and full-length exams to build up your endurance. If you're starting cold now, I would recommend aiming for April or June at the earliest, and devoting roughly 2/3 of your time to logical reasoning, since it is 2/3 of the test. But basically, do the work. Get Law Hub Advantage so that you have the actual official practice tests. I typically recommend not using a book because a lot of those books are outdated and the LSAT's online now. So I recommend instead getting a course, getting some coaching. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody out there watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Happy to help out anybody watching this now or later. I see Fady is asking if they should retake a 174. I know a lot of folks would love a 174, but it's a valid question because a 174 is still at the medians of some T14 law schools. And so if you want to go T14, meaning you want to go to a top law school like Harvard, Yale, Stanford, maybe you want to have a 177, maybe you want to have a 180. And so the question is, what were your practice tests going in? Were your practice tests higher than a 174? If so, then you could reasonably expect that you might be able to do better. In fact, I recommend that everybody retake the LSAT at least once, for the simple reason that law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores, but rather they only take the highest score on record, meaning there is no downside to retaking. If you do worse, no big deal. The higher score still counts. If you do better, congrats, you've now got a higher score on record that schools are considering. And the reason they only consider the highest score is because that is what goes to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News pulls their data from for inclusion in the ever-important US News Law School rankings. And so, Fady, if your LSAT PT average going in was higher than 174, I would definitely retake. If it was at 174 or slightly below, retake anyway. And of course, if you study a bit more, give yourself more time, target your weak areas, then it might be well worth retaking and getting a higher score. And it's quite likely, in fact, if you give yourself some more time to study. And of course, feel free to reach out to me. We could talk through your situation more. De Newman is asking, my first diagnostic was a 137. I'm now in the low 150s after 2 months of studying. What should be my next steps? Should I study and wait to apply next cycle or apply with a lower score? So I would definitely give yourself more time because, and this might sound harsh, but there's not really any law school worth going to with an LSAT in the low 150s. The schools that will take you with an LSAT in the low 150s don't have good PAR passage rates. They don't have good employment outcomes. Some of them are at risk of being shut down or losing their accreditation. And so I would recommend giving yourself more time to study. Take it in April or June at the earliest, then take it in June or August as a backup for your second take and apply at the very beginning of the cycle in the fall when applications open. Hopefully, with another 3 to 6 months of studying, you could get yourself into the high 160s, if not low 170s, and have radically different, meaning much better outcomes for admissions and for getting scholarships. So in other words, never apply with a lower score. Always study more, apply with a higher score, and wait to apply if you need to, because getting more scholarship money, getting into better schools, getting better employment outcomes, getting better salaries upon graduating as a first-year associate, this is the easiest money you'll ever make. What you're doing now establishes the foundation for the rest of your legal career. Well worth giving yourself the time and not rushing the process. Manal's asking about tips for test anxiety when thinking about taking the LSAT. A couple thoughts here. First is that a lot of anxiety is about uncertainty, not knowing how things are going to go. The antidote is by having proper preparation going into the LSAT. And so if you had taken 10, 15, 20 practice exams before the official, you might not feel as anxious because you would know you've done it all before and you're capable of reaching your goals. If you haven't done 20 exams, do 20 exams. Additionally, there are some tactics you can use like mindfulness meditation, box breathing, focusing on your breath, even just 3 to 5 minutes a day over the course of a month or two can work wonders. It's a small investment, pays off big over time because you are training your focus abilities like a muscle. Whenever you recognize that your focus wandered, you bring it back to the breath. Just like when you are in the middle of a logical reasoning section and your mind wanders or you spiral, you recognize that it's happening, you bring it back to the task at hand. And not enough people focus on this. They focus on LSAT question types and logic and all of that matters, but we also want to focus on test-taking strategies because it is not enough to get questions right. You got to get them right under test day conditions in the context of a full timed exam. And if you find this sort of thing helpful, I do these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, on YouTube and TikTok. If you find these helpful, please spread the word. The only way this grows is through word of mouth. And if you'd like to meet with me personally, I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons to everybody watching this now or later. The link is unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, and in my bio on TikTok as well. Open offer to everybody. Happy to help you out and meet with you personally over video. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.